The vampire king closed his eyes, pretending to sleep, testing if the maid's daughter would try to kill him like the rumors said. Instead, she did something that shattered 400 years of darkness. He watched, frozen, as the girl with trembling hands accidentally revealed a truth that would break his curse, start a war, and force him to choose between his throne and the daughter he never knew existed. The obsidian candles burned black in the grand hall, their flames casting shadows that danced like tortured souls across marble walls. King Lucian sat motionless on his throne, fingers drumming against the armrest carved from a single piece of midnight stone. His crimson eyes tracked each mortal as they shuffled forward, trembling hands clutching their ceremonial cups. Next, his voice echoed through the cavernous chamber. An elderly man stumbled forward, nearly dropping his offering of dark wine. Lucian's lip curled. The ritual bored him. 5 centuries of the same pathetic parade, humans offering blood wine to avoid being drained themselves. He'd rather be hunting in the northern forests, but tradition bound even kings. Then he smelled it. Something different. Something dangerous. His nostrils flared as a woman in a servant's gray dress approached, her head bowed so low her chin nearly touched her chest. Behind her, barely visible in the woman's shadow, walked a girl no older than 16. The child's heartbeat thundered in Lucian's ears, too loud, too alive. Her pulse sang a melody he hadn't heard in 400 years. "My lord," the maid whispered, her voice cracking. "My daughter Arya wishes to pour your final cup tonight, if you'll permit it." Lucian's generals shifted uncomfortably on either side of the throne. Varek, his oldest commander, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. The massive vampire's scarred face twisted in suspicion. "My king, perhaps." Silence. Lucian raised one pale hand, his gaze fixed on the girl. She was unremarkable at first glance. Brown hair, simple clothes, dirt under her fingernails from scrubbing floors. But her eyes, those eyes held something ancient, something that made the brand on his neck itch. The cursed sigil that had burned into his flesh 4 centuries ago suddenly felt hot as molten iron. "Come forward, child." Arya's legs shook as she climbed the 13 steps to the throne. The golden chalice in her hands rattled, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Every vampire in the hall watched her with predatory intensity. Some licked their fangs. Others leaned forward, inhaling her scent like starving wolves. But Lucian saw something else. The way candlelight seemed to bend around her. The way shadows recoiled from her footsteps. And most disturbing, the way his ancient curse mark pulsed with each beat of her heart. The whispers had reached him 3 nights ago. A tavern drunk rambling about a child born in the old church ruins during a blood moon. A girl whose very existence could undo the King of Shadows. Lucian had dismissed it as nonsense, another ridiculous prophecy from frightened mortals. Now, watching her approach, he wondered if he'd been wrong. "Pour," he commanded, then did something he hadn't done in 500 years. He closed his eyes. To any observer, the vampire king appeared to have dozed off, a display of supreme boredom and contempt. But Lucian's other senses sharpened to a razor's edge. He heard Arya's racing heart, smelled the fierce sweat on her skin, felt the displacement of air as she raised the chalice. Then came the gasp. Her foot caught on the edge of the throne platform. The chalice tilted. Lucian heard the splash of wine hitting stone, followed by something else, a single drop of liquid hitting the wine still swirling in his personal cup on the armrest. The sound it made was wrong. Not water, not wine. Blood. The girl had cut her finger on the chalice's jeweled rim. "I'm sorry." Arya's voice cracked with terror. "Please, I'm so." The words died as the hall began to shake. Lucian's eyes snapped open. Every muscle in his body locked as fire erupted across his neck. The cursed sigil, the brand that had kept him bound to darkness for 4 centuries, blazed to life. Black smoke poured from his skin as the mark burned brighter than the sun. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The agony was total, absolute. Around him, vampires leaped to their feet. Varric's hand flew to his sword. The king is under attack. But Lucien saw what they couldn't. Through tears of pain, he watched the impossible happen. The sigil wasn't killing him. It was fading. The cursed symbols that had been carved into his flesh by the witch who'd slaughtered his mate, the brand that had turned him from a man into a monster, began to peel away like ash in the wind. And where it burned, his skin beneath emerged smooth and unmarked. The scars covering his chest and arms, centuries of battles, of suffering, knit themselves together. Color returned to his deathly pale complexion. For the first time in 400 years, Lucien felt his heart beat. One pulse, then another. Impossible, Magnus, his scholar general, breathed from across the hall. The shaking stopped. Smoke cleared. Lucien slumped forward, gasping for air he no longer needed, but his body suddenly craved. His hands gripped the throne's armrests, so hard the stone cracked. Arya stood frozen, her bleeding fingers still extended, wine and blood dripping from the chalice onto the marble floor. Her eyes were wide with horror.
What?
What did you do to him? Her mother screamed, trying to pull her back. But Lucien raised his head, and every vampire in the room took an involuntary step backward. His eyes had changed. No longer the flat crimson of the undead, they now swirled with gold and red, mortal and monster mixed. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries. Who is your father? The question hung in the air like a blade. Arya's mother collapsed to her knees, pulling her daughter down with her. Please mercy, my lord. She meant no harm. She's just a... Who is her father? Lucien roared, rising from his throne. The maid's face crumbled. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. She has none, my lord. She was born in the ruins of the old church, under the blood moon. Just me and the stones and the ghosts that still walk those halls. The old church, where Lucien had lost everything 400 years ago, where the witch had cursed him after killing his pregnant mate, where he'd burned the world down in his rage. Varric's voice cut through the silence like a knife. The prophecy, he turned to face Lucien, hand still on his sword. The child of light, who will undo the king of shadows. My lord, this is an assassin. The church has sent. Look at his neck. Lyra, the female general, pointed with a trembling finger. The mark is gone. Chaos erupted. Half the vampires surged forward to see, while others drew weapons and surrounded Arya and her mother. Accusations flew like arrows. Traitor.
Witch.
Abomination. The word assassin echoed from a dozen throats. But Lucien stood perfectly still, staring at the girl who had just unmade 4 centuries of suffering with a single drop of blood. Her eyes met his, and in them, he saw something that made his newly beating heart skip. Recognition. As if she knew him. As if she'd been waiting for him. Clear the hall, Lucien said quietly. Nobody moved. Clear the hall. The vampires scattered like shadows before dawn, leaving only his 3 generals, the maid, and the girl who had just changed everything. Lucien descended the steps slowly, each footfall deliberate. He stopped before Arya, close enough to smell the blood still welling from her finger, close enough to see the way she didn't flinch, even though every instinct should be screaming at her to run. What are you? He whispered. Arya's voice came out steady despite her fear. I don't know, my lord, but I've dreamed of you every night since I was born. The hall seemed to hold its breath. And deep in the castle's foundation, in the moon vault sealed for 400 years, something ancient stirred at the sound of her voice. Lucien's hand shot out and grabbed Arya's wrist before anyone could react. Her blood, still wet, still warm, touched his palm. The effect was instantaneous. White light exploded from the point of contact, flooding the hall with brilliance that sent vampires screaming and diving for cover. Lucien's body convulsed as if struck by lightning. His skin began to smoke, the acrid stench of burning flesh filling the air. Release her. Varric lunged forward, sword drawn. But Lucien couldn't let go even if he wanted to. His muscles locked, his jaw clenched, so tight his fangs pierced his own lip. The burning spread from his hand up his arm, across his chest, consuming him inch by inch. It should have been agony. It should have killed him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Through the white-hot pain, Lucien watched in stunned silence as the scars covering his body, 5 centuries worth of battles and torture, began to dissolve. The claw marks across his ribs from the werewolf war. The silver burns on his shoulders from the hunter's ambush. The deep gash across his chest where the witch's blade had pierced his heart the night she cursed him. All of it, healing. His pale, corpse-like skin flushed with color. The hollow emptiness that had lived in his chest since the day he died filled with something warm and alive. For the first time in 500 years, Lucien felt the sun's memory in his veins. The light faded. The burning stopped. Lucien released Aria's wrist and stumbled backward, staring at his hands. They looked human. The black veins that had crawled beneath his skin like poisoned rivers were gone. His fingernails, once sharp as claws, had softened. Even his reflection in the polished marble floor showed something he'd forgotten existed, a shadow. Vampires didn't cast shadows. Impossible, Magnus breathed, his scholarly composure shattered. He pulled an ancient tome from his robes with shaking hands, flipping through pages frantically. The prophecy. A child of light will undo the king of shadows we thought it meant destroy, but it means heal. Lyra finished, her warrior's face slack with shock. She's healing him. Varric's sword remained raised, his eyes darting between Lucien and the girl. My king, this is dark magic. The church has planted her here to weaken you, to make you vulnerable. Vulnerable. Lucien's laugh came out half-mad. He flexed his fingers, feeling strength he'd forgotten existed. I feel more alive than I have in centuries. Exactly. Varric's voice rose. You're becoming mortal. This child is stripping away your immortality. She's a weapon. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Aria's mother threw herself forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter.
No, please.
She doesn't understand what she is. We're just servants. We've lived here peacefully for... Where? Lucien's voice cut through her pleading like a blade. He stepped closer, his newly golden eyes boring into the maid's terrified face. Where exactly was she born? The maid's lips trembled. The old church ruins. St. Meridian's. The name struck Lucien like a physical blow. He staggered, catching himself on a marble column. St. Meridian's. The place where he'd been mortal once. Where he'd fallen in love with a woman whose smile could light up the darkest night. Where they'd planned to raise their child together. Where the witch had murdered her and cursed him on the same blood-soaked altar. That church burned, Lucien said quietly. I burned it myself. 400 years ago. The stones remained, my lord, the maid's voice shook. And the altar? I was a priestess once, before the war. I fled there when the village was attacked. I was with child, alone, terrified. On the night of the blood moon, my water broke on those old stones. Magnus' tome slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a thunderous crack. The blood moon. 400 years ago, exactly. The same night you. The same night I was cursed, Lucien finished, his voice hollow. Varric seized on the information like a predator. Don't you see? This is orchestrated. The church knew about that night, knew about the curse, and they've engineered this. This thing to destroy you. She carries the mark, Lyra suddenly shouted, pointing at Aria. Everyone turned. The female general strode forward and roughly grabbed Aria's shoulder, spinning her around and yanking down the collar of her dress. There, at the base of Aria's neck, was a birthmark. But not just any birthmark. Lucien's blood turned to ice in his veins. The mark was crimson, shaped like a crescent moon wrapped around a rose. The exact same symbol that had been his family crest. The same mark his mate had worn as a tattoo over her heart. the same mark that would have been passed to their child.
No, Lucien whispered.
No, that's not possible. The maid's face crumbled completely. She looked up at him with eyes full of ancient guilt and terrible truth. My lord, I lied. Arya is not my daughter by blood. I found her that night, on the altar stones. A newborn, still covered in birth blood, crying under the moon, alone. I should have left her, I knew what she was, but I couldn't. She was so small, so helpless. The hall spun around Lucien. His mind raced back 400 years, to the witch's mocking laughter as she drove the blade through his mate's pregnant belly, to his own screams as the curse burned into his neck, to the way he'd burned everything, reduced the church to rubble and ash in his grief. He'd never checked for the child, never looked, had assumed the witch had killed them both. You're telling me, Lucien's voice came out strangled, that my mate survived long enough to give birth? The magic preserved her, my lord. The maid's tears flowed freely now. Just long enough. I found her body beside the altar, holding the babe. She'd hidden her under her cloak, protected her from the flames. With her last breath, she must have. Arya stood frozen, her face white as death. What are you saying? Lucien looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw it. The curve of her jaw, the shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when confused. All of it was his mate's. All of it was her. I'm saying, the maid whispered, that Arya is your daughter, my king. The child everyone thought died 400 years ago. The child the curse was meant to kill. Varric's roar of fury shook the rafters. Lies. All lies. My king, she's bewitched you. She. His words cut off as half the vampire lords who'd been hiding in the shadows suddenly stepped into the light, weapons drawn. Varric turned to face them, a terrible smile spreading across his scarred face. Or perhaps, my former king, you've simply become too weak to rule. The betrayal, Lucien realized with cold clarity, had been planned long before tonight. And now, with his power in question and his newly discovered daughter in the crosshairs, the real battle was about to begin. Lucien's hand instinctively moved to where his sword should have been, but he'd left it in his chambers. He never needed weapons in his own throne room. A mistake that might cost him everything. Varric, what is this? Lyra's voice was sharp, her own blade already drawn as she positioned herself between the rebels and Lucien. This, Varric gestured broadly at the armed vampires emerging from the shadows, is necessity. Our king has been compromised. Look at him. He bleeds like a mortal, heals like a human. This child has unmade 5 centuries of power with a single touch. Magnus stepped forward, his scholarly demeanor replaced by cold calculation. You planned this. You've been waiting for an excuse to move against him. Waiting. Varric laughed bitterly. I've been watching our king grow soft for decades, making peace treaties with werewolves, allowing mortals to settle near our borders. And now this, taking a human child's side over his own generals? He spat on the marble floor. The vampire king I served would have drained that girl the moment she touched him. Lucien's jaw clenched. The newly returned heartbeat in his chest hammered against his ribs. You dare. I dare, because someone must. Varric's eyes blazed red. Half the court agrees with me. We didn't survive 5 centuries by showing mercy. We survived through fear, through power, through the willingness to do what mortals cannot stomach. Lord Voss, a scarred vampire who commanded the Eastern Territories, stepped beside Varric. The prophecy spoke true. The child of light unmakes the king of shadows. But it didn't say we had to let it happen, his gaze fixed on Arya with predatory hunger. Kill the girl, break the spell. Return our king to what he was. Or, another voice called from the shadows, crown a new king who won't be weakened by human blood. The maid screamed and threw herself over Arya as 3 vampires lunged forward. They never reached her. Lucien moved faster than thought, his body responding with speed that shocked even him. Despite the changes, Despite the mortality seeping back into his veins, 500 years of combat instinct remained. He caught the first vampire by the throat, twisted, and sent him flying into a marble column with enough force to crack stone. The second lost his head to Lyra's blade before he took 2 steps. The third stumbled back, suddenly uncertain. "You forget," Lucien's voice dropped to a deadly whisper, "that I was a warrior long before I was a monster. And I've forgotten more about killing than you've ever learned." Varric's smile never wavered. "Perhaps. But you're outnumbered, weakened, and protecting cattle." He raised his hand, and 20 more vampires stepped into the light, surrounding them in a loose circle. "Surrender the girl. Abdicate the throne. Do this, and I'll let you live out whatever mortal years she's cursed you with." "Never," Lucien growled. "Then you'll die protecting an illusion." Varric's voice hardened. "That child isn't your daughter. She's a church weapon, grown in their laboratories, designed to smell like your lost mate so you drop your guard." And it worked perfectly. For a heartbeat, doubt flickered in Lucien's chest. Could it be true? Could the church have engineered this? Then Arya spoke, her voice small but steady. "I dream of a garden, with silver roses that bloom at midnight, and a woman with red hair who sings a lullaby about the stars keeping watch over her little moon." Lucien's world stopped. The silver roses, the midnight garden, the lullaby his mate sang to her unborn child, a song she'd made up herself, that no one else could possibly know. "No church could fabricate that," Magnus said quietly, his scholarly eyes sharp. "My king, she's real. Then she's a liability we cannot afford." Varric roared. "Will you sacrifice everything we've built for sentiment?" "Everything you've built," Lyra corrected, her sword still raised, "was built on his power. You command nothing without him." "We'll see." Varric's smile turned vicious. "Guards, seal the throne room. No one leaves until this is settled." The massive iron doors slammed shut with a boom that echoed through the castle. From outside came the sound of chains rattling, locks clicking into place. Lucien's enhanced hearing picked up something else: footsteps.
Hundreds of them.
Throughout the castle, vampires were moving with purpose. Not just in the throne room, but everywhere. "You've mobilized an army," he said flatly. "While you were playing games with prophecies, I was ensuring our future." Varric drew his own blade, black steel that drank in the candlelight. "I gave you a chance to step aside peacefully. You refused. So now we do this the old way." Magnus moved closer to Lucien, his voice urgent. "The moon vault. If we can reach it." "The moon vault." Varric's laugh was sharp. "You think those old wards will protect you?" "My king, I've had 400 years to study every defense in this castle. There is nowhere you can hide that I cannot reach." Lucien's mind raced. The vault was their only chance. Ancient silver wards that even he couldn't break, designed to protect the royal bloodline in times of siege. But reaching it meant fighting through 3 levels of castle, past Varric's forces, while protecting Arya and her mother.
Impossible.
Unless. "Lyra," Lucien said quietly. "The southern passage behind the tapestry. Can you get them there?" The female warrior's eyes widened in understanding. The secret passage, known only to the royal guard. It led directly to the vault's outer chamber. "Consider it done," she said. Magnus with her. "Keep them alive." "My king." "That's an order." Varric's eyes narrowed. "Whatever you're planning won't work. I have 50 vampires between here and anywhere you want to go." Lucien smiled, and for the first time since his transformation, the expression held no warmth, only the cold promise of violence. "Then I suggest they move." "You're mortal now," Varric reminded him. "You can die." "Yes," Lucien agreed, cracking his knuckles. "But not easily. And not tonight." He nodded to Lyra. She moved in a blur, scooping up Arya and her mother, racing toward the hidden tapestry as Magnus covered her retreat with a wall of conjured shadows. Old magic, expensive magic. Varric's rebels surged forward as one. And Lucien, the vampire king who just rediscovered his humanity, met them with the fury of a father protecting his child. The battle for the throne had begun. The moon vault's silver doors sealed behind them with a sound like thunder. Arya collapsed against the cold stone wall, her mother's arms wrapped tight around her shoulders. Lyra stood guard at the entrance, her blade still dripping with rebel blood. "Will he survive?" the maid whispered, her eyes fixed on the sealed door. "He's survived 5 centuries of war," Lyra said, though her voice lacked conviction. "A few traitors won't." The entire castle shook. Dust rained from the ancient ceiling as a massive explosion rocked the foundations. Through the thick walls, they heard screams, vampire and human alike, followed by the roar of flames. "They're burning the castle," Magnus breathed, his face pale. "They're actually burning it. To smoke us out," Lyra finished grimly. "Varric knows we can't stay here forever." Arya pulled away from her mother and walked deeper into the vault. The chamber stretched back into darkness, lit only by veins of silver or running through the walls like frozen lightning. The air tasted old, untouched for centuries. "How long can we last?" her mother asked. 3 days, Magnus calculated. "Maybe 4, if we ration the water stores." But the king, he didn't finish. They all knew what he meant. Lucien was out there alone, facing dozens of rebels while transformed into something closer to mortal. Every minute that passed lowered his chances of survival. Another explosion.
Closer this time.
"They're systematically destroying the outer wings," Lyra observed, pressing her ear to the stone, driving any survivors toward the center. Classic siege tactics. Arya moved further into the vault, drawn by something she couldn't name. Her fingers traced the silver veins in the walls, and where she touched, they seemed to glow faintly. The darkness ahead didn't frighten her. Instead, it felt familiar, like a memory she'd forgotten. "Child, stay close," her mother called. But Arya kept walking, following the silver light deeper into the ancient chamber. The walls here were covered in carvings, old runes that hurt to look at directly. They seemed to shift and writhe in her peripheral vision, forming words in a language she shouldn't understand but somehow did. "Blood calls to blood. The lost child returns. The oath awaits completion." "What oath?" Arya whispered to the empty air. The runes flared brighter, responding to her voice. The silver veins began to pulse like arteries, carrying light instead of blood. And from somewhere deep in the vault, she heard it.
Crying.
Not a child's cry, but something older.
Sadder.
The sound of grief that had been trapped for centuries, waiting for someone to finally hear it. Arya's feet moved on their own, carrying her around a corner into a circular chamber. At its center stood a stone altar, and on that altar lay a crown, delicate silver worked with roses, untarnished by time. The moment her eyes landed on it, the crying stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the altar cracked down the middle, and light poured out, blinding, pure, ancient light that had been sealed away for 400 years.
Arya.
Her mother's scream echoed from behind her, but Arya couldn't move. The light wrapped around her like arms, like an embrace, and suddenly she wasn't in the vault anymore. She was standing in a garden at midnight, silver roses blooming under a blood moon. A woman with red hair and kind eyes knelt before her, placing a hand on her swollen belly. "My little moon," the woman sang softly, "when darkness comes to find you, remember, you carry both the night and day. Shadow and light are not enemies. They are sisters dancing." The vision shifted. The woman lay on an altar, blood pooling beneath her, a newborn crying in her arms. With her last breath, she pressed her lips to the infant's forehead and whispered words that shattered the air itself. "Blood oath. Protect her. Until Shadow finds light again." The light released Arya, and she stumbled backward, gasping. Tears streamed down her face, not her tears, but the memory of her mother's final grief, her father's anguished roar as he burned the world. She loved you, Arya whispered to the empty vault. She loved you both so much she used her last breath to hide me. The runes on the walls blazed to life, all of them, turning the vault into a constellation of silver fire. Words appeared, floating in the air like smoke. The blood oath spoken by Elena Meridian, in the moment of her death, bound the child to shadow, until the king could find his light. 4 centuries sealed. 4 centuries waiting. The curse breaks when blood meets blood. And the dance begins again. The oath, Magnus breathed, having followed Arya into the chamber. His scholarly hands trembled as he read the ancient words. Your mother didn't just hide you. She bound you to the vault's magic, protected you through time itself until Lucian could find you.
But why?
Arya's voice cracked. Why make me wait? Why not just let me die with her? Because a weak voice came from the vault entrance. She knew I would need you. They all spun. Lucian stood in the doorway, covered in blood and ash, his body riddled with silver arrow wounds. He leaned heavily against the frame, his newly mortal body finally reaching its limits. The castle burns, he said, each word costing him. Varric's forces control everything above ground. We're trapped. My king. Lyra rushed to support him, but he waved her off, his eyes fixed on Arya. 3 nights, he continued, sliding down the wall to sit. They'll siege us for 3 nights, waiting for us to emerge. Then they'll force their way in. We'll fight them, Lyra said fiercely. And lose, Lucian coughed, blood speckling his lips. They have numbers. They have silver. And he looked at his trembling hands, dying.
No.
Arya crossed the chamber in 3 strides and grabbed his hand, the same way he'd grabbed hers in the throne room. The light returned, pouring from her palm into his wounds. The silver burns began to heal, the cuts closing. But this time, something else happened. Lucian's eyes widened as memories flooded him, not his memories, but Elena's. Her final moments. Her desperate spell. Her love, preserved in magic, flowing through their daughter into him. She forgave me, he whispered, tears cutting through the blood on his face. For not saving her. For not finding you. She forgave me and made sure you'd survive to save me. Arya felt it too, the connection between them, deeper than blood. Father and daughter, united by death and reborn through love. Above them, the castle continued to burn. But in the vault, surrounded by silver light and ancient magic, something new was being forged. Not just healing. Power. The first night passed in tense silence. They could hear Varric's forces prowling above, searching for weak points in the vault's defenses. The second night brought attempts to breach the silver wards, dark magic that sizzled and died against the ancient protections. By the third night, Lucian had healed completely. But something had changed. As Arya's light merged with his darkness, his vampiric nature hadn't been erased. It had been transformed. His strength returned, greater than before. His speed remained supernatural. But now he could feel warmth, taste food, sense the subtle shifts in temperature that the undead never noticed. You're something new, Magnus observed, watching Lucian pace the vault like a caged wolf. Neither fully vampire nor fully human. Hybrid. Whatever I am, Lucian said, testing the weight of a silver sword he'd pulled from the vault's armory, a blade that should have burned his flesh but now felt merely warm. It won't matter if we can't break the siege. They're gathering on the plains, Lyra reported, returning from a scouting spell. Varric has called every rebel vampire from across the kingdom. 200 strong, maybe more. They plan to storm the vault at dawn. Why dawn? Arya asked. Lyra's expression darkened. Because that's when you're weakest. They've studied you, learned your patterns. Your power flares at night, but dims with daylight. They're going to wait for the sun to rise, then break through while you can't defend yourself. Arya looked at her hands, still glowing faintly with silver light. The woman Lyra was right. She could feel the power ebbing and flowing with the cycle of day and night, tied to the blood moon of her birth. "Then we leave before dawn," Lucian said flatly. "Leave?" Magnus' eyes widened. "My king, they control the entire castle. The moment we open these doors." "We don't use the doors," Lucian's smile was sharp. "This vault was built with an escape route. Every royal sanctuary has one. The question is whether it's still intact after 4 centuries. He led them to the far wall, pressing his hand against a specific rune. The stone groaned, then slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into darkness. "It leads to the crypts beneath the plains," Lucian explained. "We emerge a quarter-mile from the castle. If we move fast—" "They'll see us," Lyra interrupted. "The plains are open ground. 200 vampires against 5 of us, one of whom is mortal," she nodded at the maid. "4 of us," Lucian corrected. "The maid stays here." "No," Aria's mother stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "I raised her for 16 years. I don't abandon her now. You'll slow us down. Varric would kill you in seconds. Then I'll die protecting my daughter," the maid's chin lifted. "As any mother would." Lucian stared at her for a long moment, then nodded with something like respect. "Very well. But stay behind Magnus. He'll shield you." They descended into the tunnel as the third night waned toward dawn. The passage was cramped, forcing them to move single file through centuries of cobwebs and dust. Twice they heard sounds from above, Varric's forces moving into position, preparing for the assault. "Almost there," Lucian whispered as pale gray light appeared ahead. They emerged in the old crypts just as the sun began to paint the horizon pink. The cursed plains stretched before them, a wasteland of dead grass and cracked earth where nothing had grown since the night of Lucian's transformation. And waiting for them, spread across the plains like a dark tide, stood Varric's army. "They knew," Magnus breathed. "They knew about the tunnel." Varric's voice boomed across the distance. "Did you think me a fool, old friend? I've had 400 years to study every secret of this castle, every escape route, every hidden passage." Lucian's hand tightened on his sword. They were surrounded, rebels ahead, the castle burning behind, no retreat possible. "There's too many," Lyra said quietly, her warrior's eye calculating the odds. "Even with your new strength, my king, we can't fight 200. "We don't need to fight them all," Lucian's gaze fixed on Varric at the center of the rebel formation. "Just him. Cut off the head, the body falls. He won't face you alone. He's not stupid." "Then we make him." Lucian stepped forward onto the open plain, raising his voice. "Varric, you accuse me of cowardice, of weakness. Yet you hide behind an army like a frightened child. Face me yourself if you dare. Or does the mighty general need 200 soldiers to defeat one weakened king?" The challenge echoed across the plains. Varric's scarred face twisted with rage, exactly as Lucian intended. Pride was always a warrior's greatest weakness. "You want single combat?" Varric's laugh was bitter.
Fine.
"But when I kill you, the girl comes with me. Her blood will restore what she stole from you, and I'll drink it myself." "If you kill me," Lucian agreed, "she's yours."
No.
Arya lunged forward, but Magnus caught her arm. "Trust him," the scholar urged. "This is what he does. He's been outmaneuvering enemies for 5 centuries." Varric drew his black blade and strode onto the plains. His rebels parted, forming a circle, a killing ground where only one would leave alive. Lucian walked to meet him, silver sword gleaming in the dawn light. They circled each other like wolves, searching for weakness. "You were my brother once," Lucian said softly. "Brothers don't choose mortals over immortals. She's my daughter." "She's a curse." Varric struck without warning, his blade moving faster than lightning. Lucian parried, barely. The impact sent shockwaves through his arms. Varric's strength hadn't changed. He was still a full vampire, still immortal, still deadly. They clashed again and again, trading blows that would shatter stone. Lucien's new hybrid nature gave him speed and strength, but Varric had centuries of experience fighting without mercy. A blade slipped through Lucien's guard, cutting deep across his ribs. "You're bleeding," Varric taunted. "How mortal of you!" Behind them, Arya screamed. Not in fear, in rage. The sound hit the battlefield like a physical force. The blood moon mark on her neck blazed with light so bright the vampires shielded their eyes. Power erupted from her in waves, raw and uncontrolled. Lucien felt it pour into him through their blood connection, pure energy, ancient magic, the culmination of Elena's final spell finally releasing. His wounds healed instantly. His strength multiplied. The silver sword in his hand burst into flames, not normal fire, but white light that burned with the intensity of the sun itself. "Impossible," Varric breathed, taking a step back. Lucien's eyes blazed gold and red. "You wanted to see me at full power? Here it is." He moved like lightning incarnate. Varric barely raised his blade in time. The impact of Lucien's strike drove him back 20 feet, his boots carving trenches in the dead earth. The rebel vampires gasped. No one had ever pushed Varric back before. "She's making you stronger," Varric snarled, wiping black blood from his lip. "Using forbidden magic." "Not forbidden." Lucien circled him, the burning blade casting dancing shadows. "Inherited. This is what our bloodline was always meant to be, balance between light and dark." Varric's eyes flickered to Arya, still blazing with power. Kill the girl, break the spell. Simple math. He moved with desperate speed, abandoning Lucien and launching himself toward Arya like a missile. "No!" Lucien's roar shook the plains. But Varric was too fast, too focused. His claws extended, aimed directly at Arya's heart. Arya's mother stepped in front of her daughter. Time seemed to slow as Varric's claws pierced through the maid's chest. Her eyes went wide, not with pain, but with defiant satisfaction.
"Not."
"My daughter," she gasped, blood bubbling from her lips. "Never. My daughter." Varric tried to pull back, but the maid grabbed his arm with surprising strength, holding him in place. "Now, my king." Lucien was already moving. His silver blade, burning with holy fire, pierced through Varric's back and erupted from his chest in a spray of ancient blood. Varric screamed, a sound that echoed across dimensions. The blade wasn't just silver. Charged with Arya's power, it burned him from the inside out, consuming the darkness that had sustained him for centuries. "You fight like a man protecting a child," Varric choked out, his body beginning to smoke. Lucien twisted the blade deeper. "I fight like a father protecting his legacy." He drove the sword upward, through Varric's heart, and into the sky. White light exploded from the wound, reducing the ancient vampire to ash that scattered on the dawn wind. Silence fell across the plains. The rebel army stood frozen, watching their commander dissolve into nothing. Lucien stood at the center of the killing ground, his blade still burning, his eyes daring any of them to move. None did. Then Lyra's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Your leader is dead. The rebellion ends here. Kneel before your rightful king, or join Varric in oblivion." Lord Voss was the first to drop to one knee. Then another vampire and another. Like a wave, the entire rebel army knelt, heads bowed in submission. But Lucien barely noticed. He was already running to where Arya cradled her mother's broken body. "No, no, no," Arya sobbed, her hands pressed to the wound. Silver light poured from her palms, trying desperately to heal the damage. "Don't leave me, please. You're all I've ever known." The maid's hand lifted, trembling, and touched Arya's cheek. "Not true. You know
Him now.
your real father," she coughed, blood speckling her chin. "I was just keeping you safe until he could find you." "You were more than that," Lucien said, kneeling beside them. His voice cracked. "You gave her love. You gave her life. That's not just anything. The maid's eyes found his. She dreams of gardens, because I told her.
About them.
Of her mother's songs, because I sang them. I gave her everything I had. I know Lucien took her hand. Thank you.
Take care.
Of our girl. Always. The maid smiled, peaceful at last, and her eyes closed for the final time. Aria's wail of grief shattered the dawn. Light erupted from her in waves, uncontrolled, raw. It washed over the plains like a tsunami, and where it touched, something miraculous happened. The dead grass began to grow. Flowers, silver and gold, burst from the cursed earth that hadn't sustained life in 4 centuries. The cracked ground healed, becoming rich soil. Trees sprouted, their branches reaching toward the sky as if they'd been waiting centuries to breathe. And the vampires, kneeling in that wash of light, felt something they'd never experienced. Warmth. Not the cold fire of their undead nature, but true warmth. The curse that had bound them to eternal night, that had forced them to feed on blood to survive, began to crack and peel away like old paint. Lord Voss looked at his hands in wonder. The curse. It's fading. The girl. Another vampire breathed. Her grief is healing the land. Magnus stumbled forward, his scholarly mind racing. The prophecy. A child of light will undo the king of shadows. We thought it meant only Lucien, but it meant all of us. The curse wasn't individual, it was territorial. The witch cursed the entire kingdom when she killed Elena. And Aria's blood, Lyra continued, understanding dawning, bonded to Lucien's, breaks it completely. But only when their power fully merges. When emotion unlocks it, Lucien finished, staring at his daughter.
Love. Grief.
The things that make us most human. Arya looked up, tears streaming down her face. I can't control it. It's too much. I can feel everything. The land, the people, the pain of 400 years trying to heal all at once. Lucien pulled her into his arms. Then don't control it. Let it flow. Let it heal. Your mother, both your mothers, wanted this. They wanted life, not death. Growth, not decay. Arya buried her face in his chest and wept, and the power flowed freely. The sun rose higher, its light no longer painful to the vampires. They stood slowly, removing their protective cloaks, and for the first time in 4 centuries, felt sunlight on their skin without burning. It's beautiful, one whispered. We're free, another said, voice full of wonder. But in the center of the growing garden, Lucien held his daughter as she grieved, whispering the lullaby Elena had once sung, the one about stars keeping watch over the little moon. The rebellion was over. The curse was breaking. But the price had been paid in blood and sacrifice, and the memory would never fade. Around them, the kingdom began to heal, one blade of grass at a time. The sun climbed higher, and the impossible became reality. Vampires who hadn't seen daylight in centuries stood with faces turned toward the sky, tears of blood streaming down their cheeks. Some fell to their knees in reverence. Others simply laughed, wild, disbelieving sounds that echoed across the blooming plains. My king, Lord Voss approached cautiously, his weathered face uncertain.
What?
What are we now? Lucien looked up from where he still held Arya. I don't know. Something new. Something that shouldn't exist. Magnus had already begun examining the transformed vampires, his scholarly curiosity overriding his grief. The bloodlust is gone, he reported, pressing his fingers to Lord Voss's neck. Your heart beats slowly, but it beats. You still have enhanced strength and speed, but the curse of daylight, the need to feed, both gone. How is this possible? Lyra asked, flexing her fingers in the sunlight. The original curse was tied to the land, Magnus explained, gesturing at the growing garden around them. When the witch killed Elena on that altar, she poisoned the territory itself. Every vampire bound to this kingdom carried that poison. But Aria's blood, merged with Lucien's through the oath Elena cast, acts as an antidote. It's purging the curse from the land and everyone connected to it. Then we're free, Voss said, wonder in his voice. Truly free. But Arya pulled away from Lucien, her face pale. The woman who raised me is dead. We're not free. We've just traded one curse for another. Arya. Lucien reached for her. Don't, she stepped back, her eyes red from crying. You didn't even know I existed until 3 days ago. She was my mother for 16 years. She died because of me. She died protecting you, Lucien said gently. As your real mother did. As I would have if given the chance. But you weren't there. The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. Neither of you were. She was alone, raising a child she found bleeding on an altar, never knowing what I was or what I'd become. And I never even knew her real story. Never knew she was a priestess, that she gave up everything to save me. Lucien's heart, his beating mortal heart, ached. You're right. I wasn't there. I failed both your mothers and you. But I'm here now, and I swear on everything I am, I will not fail you again. Pretty words from a monster. From a father, Lucien corrected, who happens to be a monster.
Or was.
I'm not sure what I am anymore. Arya looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw the truth written in his transformed eyes. The grief that matched her own. The desperate hope of a man who'd lost everything and suddenly been given an impossible second chance. She made me promise, Arya said quietly, to give you a chance. Right before at the end, she said, he's your father. Love him as I loved you. Lucien's composure cracked. He closed his eyes, fighting back emotions 5 centuries of undeath had taught him to bury. When he opened them again, tears, real, human tears, ran down his face. I don't deserve that, he said. But I'll spend every day of whatever life I have left trying to earn it. Arya stood silent for a long moment, then crossed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around him. Not the embrace of a warrior or a king, but of a daughter finding her father at last. Tell me about her, Arya whispered. About my real mother. Not the prophecies or the magic. Just who she was. Lucien's arms tightened around her. She laughed like rainfall. She could calm the wildest horse with a single touch. She believed that every person, no matter how dark, carried a seed of light somewhere inside them. His voice broke. She was everything good in me, and when she died, the light went with her. Until now, behind them, the maid's body still lay in the grass. Lyra had covered her with a cloak, treating her with the honor due to a fallen warrior. We should bury her, Arya said, pulling back. With ceremony. She deserves that. She deserves more, Lucien said. We'll build a monument in the castle gardens. A statue of her holding a child, commemorating the woman who saved a kingdom by choosing love over fear. The gardens are ash, Lord Voss reminded him gently. Then we rebuild them, Lucien's voice strengthened, finding its command again. We rebuild everything. The castle, the villages, the trust between our peoples. He turned to address the gathered vampires. For 4 centuries, we ruled through fear. That ends today. From this moment forward, we live alongside mortals, not above them. We protect instead of prey. We build instead of destroy. Some will resist, Lyra warned. Not all vampires are here. Those in the far territories, those who weren't part of Varric's rebellion, they won't accept these changes easily. Then we'll show them. Lucien picked up the silver sword, still glowing faintly with Arya's power. We'll show them what we've become, what we can be. Magnus approached, holding something carefully. My king, there's something else. In the vault, when Arya's power activated the ancient wards, it revealed this. He opened his hands to show the crown of silver roses, Elena's crown, untarnished despite 400 years. It was sealed with her, Magnus explained, preserved by the same magic that preserved Arya. I believe Elena meant for her daughter to wear it. Lucien took the crown with trembling hands, feeling the weight of history and hope combined. He turned to Arya, who stood in her simple servant's dress, covered in dirt and tears and her mother's blood. "Arya Meridian," Lucian said formally, dropping to one knee before her. "Daughter of Elena and Lucian, child of light and shadow, will you accept this crown and stand with me as we forge a new kingdom? One where both our peoples can finally know peace." Arya looked at the crown, at her father kneeling before her, at the transformed vampires watching with hope in their eyes for the first time in centuries. She thought of the maid who raised her, of the mother she never knew, of all the sacrifice that had brought her to this impossible moment. "I will," she said, "but not as a princess who rules, as a bridge who connects." Lucian smiled and placed the crown on her head. "Then rise, princess of the two realms, and help me build something worth believing in." 6 months later, the castle no longer looked like a monument to darkness. Where obsidian towers once scraped the sky, now silver vines climbed walls of restored white stone. The gardens, once ash and memory, bloomed with flowers that existed nowhere else in the world, roses that were half shadow, half light, their petals shifting between black and white depending on the angle of the sun. Twilight gardens, they called them, where both peoples could walk together. Arya stood in the center of the largest garden, watching human children play tag with young vampires. The vampire children moved slower now, careful not to use their full strength. The human children laughed without fear. It hadn't been easy. The first month after the curse broke, chaos ruled. Vampires from distant territories arrived demanding explanations, some threatening new rebellions. Human villages, hearing rumors of a weakened vampire kingdom, prepared for war. Fear on both sides nearly destroyed everything before it could begin. But Lucian had been relentless. He traveled to every vampire's stronghold personally, showing them what he'd become, not weakened, but evolved. He'd visited human settlements with Arya at his side, proving that cooperation was possible. Some still resisted. Some always would. But slowly, impossibly, the kingdom transformed. "You look thoughtful," Magnus said, approaching with an armful of scrolls. The scholar had aged visibly in 6 months. The curse's removal had returned natural aging to the vampires. He'd gained wrinkles and gray hair, but his eyes sparkled with more life than ever before. "Just remembering," Arya said, adjusting the silver crown that still felt foreign on her head. 6 months ago, I was scrubbing floors. Now I'm negotiating trade agreements between species." "You're doing well," Magnus assured her. "The council meeting yesterday, the way you mediated between Lord Voss and the human merchants, brilliant diplomacy." Arya shook her head. "I just told them what the maid would have said. Everyone eats. Everyone bleeds. Start with what's the same, not what's different. Wise woman, your adoptive mother." She was Arya's hand touched the pendant around her neck, a simple thing, the maid's only possession, which she now wore always. "I wish she could see this." "Perhaps she can," Magnus gestured at the monument in the garden center. The statue stood 12 feet tall, carved from white marble veined with silver. It showed a woman in a simple dress holding a child, her face turned toward the sky with an expression of peaceful determination. At the base, an inscription read, "To the nameless priestess who chose love over fear and saved a kingdom with her sacrifice. May we prove worthy of her faith." Human visitors left flowers daily. Vampire lords bowed their heads in respect when passing. It had become a place of pilgrimage, a reminder of what one person's courage could accomplish. "Father's looking for you," Lyra called from across the garden. The female warrior had become Arya's personal guard and, surprisingly, her closest friend. Something about the northern delegation arriving early.
Arya sighed.
"More negotiations?" "Welcome to leadership," Lyra grinned. "It's mostly meetings and paperwork. Glory is just the stories people tell afterward." They walked through the gardens together, passing human farmers consulting with vampire engineers about irrigation systems. The vampires' enhanced strength made construction easy. The humans' knowledge of agriculture made the land flourish. Separately, each group struggled. Together, they thrived. Lucian waited in what had once been the throne room but was now simply called the council hall. The oppressive atmosphere of fear had been replaced with functional efficiency. Maps covered the walls. Charts tracked crop yields, population movements, trade routes. The northern vampires want assurances, Lucian said without preamble as Arya entered. They've heard rumors that we're planning to outlaw blood drinking entirely. Are we? Arya asked. Should we? Lucian countered. We don't need it to survive anymore, but some enjoy it. If both parties consent, vampire and human, is it wrong? That's above my understanding, Arya admitted. I'm still learning. As am I, Lucian smiled, and the expression transformed his face. 6 months of mortality had weathered him slightly, a few lines around his eyes, a touch of gray at his temples. But he looked more alive than the ageless creature who'd sat on the obsidian throne. We're building something that's never existed. There's no rulebook. Then we write one, Arya said firmly.
Together.
Not vampire rules or human rules. Our rules. A commotion outside interrupted them. Lyra's hand went to her sword out of habit, but the sound was joyful, children laughing, adults calling greetings. They stepped onto the balcony overlooking the main courtyard and froze. The courtyard was full. Hundreds of people, human and vampire, young and old, gathered for the Twilight Festival, a new tradition celebrating the moment each day when light and dark balanced perfectly. Musicians played instruments that blended human melodies with vampire harmonies. Dancers moved in patterns that incorporated both cultures' traditions. Food vendors sold items that appealed to both species. Some still preferred blood, though donated willingly now, while others enjoyed regular meals. And in the center of it all, children played under the silver trees that had sprouted from Arya's grief 6 months ago. The trees that bore fruit strange and wonderful, some that glowed in darkness, others that hummed softly when touched. A small girl, no more than 5, noticed Arya on the balcony and waved enthusiastically. Half the crowd turned and followed suit, their faces bright with genuine affection. They love you, Lucian said quietly. Both peoples. You've become what I never could, a symbol of hope instead of fear. They love what we represent, Arya corrected. The possibility that different doesn't mean enemy. Lucian watched the celebration below, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation. A vampire teaching a human child to waltz. A human farmer inviting a vampire family to harvest festival. Small moments, but they added up to something revolutionary. The curse was never in our blood, he murmured, almost to himself. It was in our hearts. We chose darkness because we thought it made us strong. But strength isn't the absence of weakness. It's choosing to protect what's fragile instead of destroying it. Arya took his hand, and her crown caught the setting sun, scattering light like stars. She knew that. Both of them did. That's why they saved me. Not because I was special, but because every child deserves a chance to choose light over darkness. And you chose to share it with everyone, Lucian said. That's the real magic. Not the power in your blood, but the love in your heart. Below, as twilight deepened, the festival continued. The first stars appeared, and the children pointed at them excitedly. Some human, some vampire, all playing together under a sky that belonged to both night and day. Lucian raised his voice to address the crowd. My people, all my people, tonight we celebrate 6 months of peace. 6 months of proving that the old ways were not the only ways. Some say what we've built is impossible. They're right. And yet here we stand. Cheers erupted. Tomorrow brings new challenges. Some will test our resolve. But if we remember why we began this journey, if we honor the sacrifices that brought us here, we cannot fail. Arya stepped forward, adding her voice. We are the children of twilight now. Neither fully light nor fully dark, but something new. Something beautiful. Something worth fighting for. The crowd roared approval. As the festival continued into the night, Arya and Lucien stood on the balcony, watching their kingdom, their strange, impossible, miraculous kingdom, celebrate the first true peace it had ever known. "Do you think it will last?" Arya asked. Lucien considered carefully. "Not without effort. Not without sacrifice. But yes, I believe it can. Because we've learned what our ancestors never understood, that the greatest power isn't domination. It's connection." A blood moon rose over the horizon, painting the sky crimson. But this time, no one feared it. The children pointed and laughed, calling it beautiful. And in that moment, watching her people united under that ancient symbol of transformation, Arya understood what both her mothers had known all along. Curses only have power if we let them. Love, given freely, breaks every chain. And sometimes, the monster in the darkness is just waiting for someone brave enough to bring the light.
The end.